Hi everyone, and welcome back to English 2 and this week's video. So, as you can probably tell, I am using a new camera. Nice fancy DSLR camera with a mic. It's all very fancy. And as a result, from now on videos should be in considerably higher quality. I'm not necessarily sure that my face is enhanced by being in HD, but certainly it feels a little more like talking to a real person than the grainy webcam video. So, today we'll be talking about our final two elements of fiction, style and voice, which are technically two separate elements, but we're counting them as one, and then theme. And we'll be talking about both of those in preparation for looking at them in our reading for today, which is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. So, briefly talk about style and voice and theme. I'll set you up with some discussion questions for Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and then in addition to putting up this video, obviously I'll put up that discussion topic and also a quiz to go with the story. I'll also be releasing a video within the next couple of days talking about our first major essay, since we're now going to be moving into talking about writing and how to write about lit. And so I'll be putting up a video about that, as well as an assignment sheet, and in the video I'll explain the assignment and go through it. Obviously, if you have any questions, you'll have a lot of ways to reach me. So that's our plan for today. So, we are going to start with style and voice, and then move on to theme. The reason I save these elements for last is because often they are kind of the hardest to pin down or distinguish. So it can kind of help to start off with the easier ones, which is what I usually do. So what makes style and voice tricky? Well, part of it is people don't always agree what is style and what is voice and what the difference is between them. The one thing everyone pretty much agrees on is that they both have to do with an author's characteristic use of language. So how they use words, how they say things, those are the sorts of things that everyone agrees style and voice entail. That said, people do disagree on the definitions, on the exact definitions, and so the versions I'm going to give you will be the ones that I'm most familiar with, the ones that I've seen most often. But keep in mind that other texts might vary a little, and that's not unusual. Like, expect that. So, the way I would define these, and a lot of the readings that I've done have done as well, is that voice is your voice. Like when you speak, you have a voice. When you write, you have a voice as well. Sorry, my phone went off. So your voice, when you write, it's a developed way of writing that sets an author apart from other authors. So it is essentially you as an author, your personality, your kind of obsessions, the things that you choose to emphasize. It's those things coming through on the page. Because this is based on you as a person, it's not going to change much. It's only going to change as you change as a person. So it tends to be fairly slow and over substantial amounts of time. Style, on the other hand, is a broader concept than voice. It's more easily changeable. For example, the same author will use probably a different style if they're writing a historical romance set in the Middle Ages than they will if they're writing a hard-boiled noir detective story set in the 1930s. And that is because we have very different expectations for the kinds of language and the kinds of dialogue and the kinds of description that those different kinds of stories use. So even though it's the same author, presumably some version of the same voice, they're using a very different style. And style is one of those things that can be put on and taken off fairly easily. So, the equivalent I would say is in your appearance, you and your body are the voice. You can change those things, but it takes some doing. Style is like your clothing. You can change that fairly easily. Hopefully you do. And you also can change it to be appropriate for whatever occasion or event that you're planning on having to do. And so style works that same way. You can consciously adopt it very easily depending on what it is that you're trying to do with your writing. There can be some overlap between style and voice, just because sometimes what is one author's voice, other authors will consciously adopt as their style. As one example of this, the author Ernest Hemingway, his voice was kind of very punchy, not descriptive, brief, dialogue heavy. And if you look at his other writing, it tends to have that same kind of aspect to it. A lot of other authors consciously adopted this as a style because Hemingway was quite successful. And for them, it was not necessarily part of their voice, at least at first. It was a consciously adopted style. Another kind of good distinction, or way to think about this distinction, is like a magazine or newspaper. It will have a house style, which is the way that they want all their writers to write. So, for example, a teen magazine might be trying to be, conversational, like, oh, we're like your friend talking to you. But each individual author will be writing with a very different voice because they're very different authors. So if you, in that teen magazine, you have one particular author you tend to like to read more than the others, that's going to be probably because of their voice and not so much because of their style, because everyone has the same style. Okay, another kind of way to think about this, you'll often have the same writer writing in different genres. My mom is a writer, actually, a published author, and she's published mystery novels, she's published books of poetry, she's published nonfiction, a cookbook specifically, and all of those have the same voice because they're by her and not written too far apart from each other, but they all have very different styles because you use language very differently when writing a cookbook than you do when you're writing a mystery novel. So, style, something fairly easy to put on and off, often associated in particular styles with particular genres or types of writing. And then voice is going to be those aspects of your writing and language use that change more slowly only as you kind of change as a person. Our final element of fiction is theme. And theme essentially is what a story is about. And I don't mean what a story is about small a, like the kind of plot or, the things that it talks about, like Harry Potter is small a about a kid who discovers he's a wizard. It is big A about a lot of other things. Much bigger ideas of like death and, like family and things like that. So what theme is what stories are big A about. This can include things like the moral of a story, but stories certainly don't have to have a moral. But usually they're saying something, some bigger idea that's going on, and that's going to be the theme of your story. And certainly stories can have multiple themes, and people may disagree about what the main theme is, but it's going to be one of those things usually that you have to do some level of close reading and use of subtext to get. Just because it's very few stories that are going to come out and say, here's what this story is big A about. So, why have a theme or look for one? The Game of Thrones creators famously said, themes are for 8th grade book reports. Why can't a story be just what it narrates? Why do we have to look further? Again, kind of going back to what we talked about with close reading, it is a very, it would be a very boring world if everything were as it seems on the surface. And we know just from the way we interact with other people that is not the way things work. Sorry, my phone is ringing again. So if our interactions with other people have things going on under the surface, certainly our communications with other people in the form of stories would as well. So, what counts as a theme? It should be something that really is a preoccupation of the story, of the text, but it also needs to be something that's not so generic that you could apply it to any text. For example, one of the really popular themes that I see people really liking to want to argue for is don't judge a book by its cover. This can work as a theme. There are stories that have this as one of their main themes. But all too often people want to apply it to any story, because really in any story where something's not like it appears on the surface, you could make the case for it. Of course, that's basically any story ever, as we kind of talked about when we looked at close reading. Every story has things going on under the surface and things that aren't as they seem. So it's not really helpful as a theme for something like that. That said, there are definitely stories where don't judge a book by its cover is totally a theme. Think about things like Beauty and the Beast, where its big thing is, like, true beauty comes within, and, don't judge people by their appearance. That works really well as a kind of theme for that. But it does need to be something that is a major kind of preoccupation of the story. So, that then brings us to our text. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a very old man with enormous wings. So Marquez is an author from Colombia, or Garcia Marquez. This comes from his first book, published in 1955. He's probably most famous for this story and for two novels, 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera. He received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982. And this story has also been made into a play and a movie. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez is really well known as probably the most prominent example of a particular kind of genre, particular kind of category for stories, called magical realism. Essentially, it is a story that blends kind of fantastical, whimsical, magical elements with everyday culture, everyday realism, like everyday humdrum life. This is not uncommon in Latin American literature, like Garcia Marquez's, but certainly it's not limited to just that. And often it's going to combine elements of the folkloric, and the literary. This does not mean that any story that has both a real world and magic is like magical realism. It really does have to blend like magical elements with like really just straight up boring everyday things. So like something like Twilight is not really necessarily magical realism, even though it is set in the regular world and it has magic and vampires and such. But it doesn't really focus on, the day-to-day life of its characters. Something like this story does. And so that's kind of what one of the things we were looking for with magical realism is we want to have those kind of everyday life moments and elements. So, as far as things for discussion, I'd like to ask first off about the story style or voice, but it's hard to tell which it is since we aren't reading anything else by the author. So for now, let's just call it style. And so I'll give you some specific places to look at and see what you think of the style in those areas. Also, what do we think on first reading could be themes of this story? And then more specifically, how do or might we explain the way the people in the story treat the man with wings? What does this behavior tell us about them? And what does it tell us about him? Also, what role does religion play in this story? And specifically the way the people kind of accept some very extraordinary events. What attitude does the story seem to be taking towards religion? So hopefully that'll give you a good place to start. And our next video will be about writing, and specifically about settling on a topic, coming up with something to say about that topic, and then turning that something you have to say into an actual argument. Also, I think on the syllabus I do technically have the first paper draft due this week. It's not going to be due this week, because we're just now getting to talk about it. So it's going to probably be due at the end of next week. So, in case you're panicking, don't worry about it. So be on the lookout for that, and once you've read this and or posted the discussion post, we also will have our third quiz on A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. So that is it for today, and I hope you've enjoyed the new shiny new video, and I will talk to you later. Bye.